Hey y'all, Big Tim here again. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Old School and Bass. So the other day we talked about fishing line 101. We talked about the differences in the monofilament and fluorocarbon and braid. Today we're going to get more specific on mono. In that original episode, Fishing Line 101, I talked about the fact that I use a lot of Sufix Siege. Well, that is true, but only on bait casters. I really don't use a lot of spinning equipment, so, this is what I use on bait casters. It's a nice, tough line with a little memory. One thing I wanted to talk about is if you're trying to learn a bait caster for the first time, this is the line to use. Not necessarily, like I said, I love Sufix, but mono is what you need to use. The reason you use mono is because it's a little bit more forgiving. It doesn't come off the reel quite as fast, so it doesn't backlash quite as easily. And you can pick those bird nests out a little easier, with mono than you can braid. And braid backlash is easier. Mono is the best one to use for not backlashing. You probably want to start out in heavier sizes, somewhere between 12, 14, even 17 pound line. The higher diameters will backlash less because they come off the reel slower. You'll probably want to dial it back when you go fishing and use a lighter line. But for now, and learning to use it, that's the best way to learn. Get some confidence in using the bait caster is the way to go. Now for spinning reels, I recommend the Sufix Elite. Sufix Elite is, it's a less stiff line. It's more limber, and it's a little bit more forgiving. That being said, at the store, I recommend this a lot because it is a little more pricey. You could also go with Trilene XL. That's a great line, which is the red label Trilene. For spinning equipment, that's one of the best ways to go, as long as Sufix. And those two are primarily what I recommend the most for spinning equipment. But the question was asked, how long can you keep line? Well, let's face it, a lot of times these companies are keeping this stuff in warehouses and everything else for a long time. So you can kind of keep it indefinitely. I know kind of indefinitely is not really a good answer, but 3, 4, 5 years, I think you're good. After that, you might want to think about getting rid of it. But that being said, 3, 4, 5 years, we're talking about keeping it in a controlled environment with air conditioning, out of direct sunlight. That's important. Out of direct sunlight and away from the direct heat source. If you're keeping your line right above the furnace or the vent for the furnace, probably not a good thing. That line will get brittle quick. Extreme temperatures will make the line get brittle quick. If you're ice fishing, if you're fishing for trout in really cold water, that line will get brittle very quickly. But as far as storing it inside, anywhere 3 to 5 years, you're good. As far as on your reel, that depends on the conditions you're fishing in. Like we talked about, ice fishing or trout fishing, cold water, that line's going to get brittle very quickly. If you're keeping your rods out in the direct sunlight a lot, that line will deteriorate quickly too. So tournament fishermen will change their lines. Some of them will change it every day. Myself, I never did. I would change mine probably about once a month, maybe every other week if I had some big tournaments lined up. But when I say that, I'd always at least peel off 5 to 10 yards of line each time to get all the possible nicks and everything else out. But as far as your everyday fisherman, if you're fishing, once every 2 months or something, you probably have to change your line maybe once a year. You should at least change it once a year. But if you're a guy that's going fishing every weekend, you probably ought to change it monthly, every other month, something like that. And the coil that we talk about, the memory, is what's going to dictate to you when to change your line, because it's going to get to the point where there's so much memory you just can't cast that mono very efficiently. So that's going to be your determining factor. And also, if you're breaking fish, that tells you need to change your line. But you can always stretch your line to get rid of memory. What I'll do a lot of times, I'll tie it to the trolling motor and walk out the street, which is probably about 35 yards. Set the hook like I'm setting the hook, stretch that line, and make it, a little bit more usable. It'll take the coil out, at least for a trip. After that, it's probably time to change it. So I hope this answers your questions about mono, and tune in next time. We're going to talk about my favorite line, fluorocarbon. See you next time.